Thakur sir, shall we start?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, good morning, all of you. Good morning, Thakur sir. Today we have our esteemed guest, Air Commodore Kia Thakur. So this is session organized for our LLM students, and we have also participants from other institutions also. So, sir, we're talking about the armed conflict, the prevention, management, and the resolution. It's a very pertinent topic, right? Especially this recent scenario what's going in across the world. So let me introduce sir. So Air Commodore K.R. Thakur is currently working as a Dean, School of Police Science and Security Studies at National Forensic Sciences University, Gandhinagar, which is set up by Ministry of Home Affairs. He's a MPhil and MSc in Defense Strategic Studies. He served for 36 years in the Indian Air Force and for last 4 years in academics and for last 3 years has been associated with the NFSU. His area of interest are homeland security, defense studies, strategic affairs, police science, air power, UN peacekeeping, crime investigation, vigilance, airport management, and human resource management. So, with this note, I, on behalf of the Paro Institute of Law, Paro Universities, I welcome you for today's the guest session. I hope our students and the other participants will be benefited from your today's talk and definitely will be having your point of view on the crisis happening at the international level. Sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you. Am I clearly audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Uh, Thank you very much. It is my privilege to uh, speak to the students of Parol University, and my sincere thanks to Dr. Kalpesh, who has taken the initiative of not just starting this series, but giving me an opportunity to speak on this platform. So, my sincere thanks to the university as well as Dr. Kalpesh. The topic that has been chosen is pretty vast. Is my slide visible, Dr. Kalpesh?
Sir, it has not come up, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I suppose it's visible now. Okay. The topic that we have chosen for ourselves is a vast topic. Okay, the armed conflict, which is a very complex activity, its prevention, if we can, nothing like it. Its management, how a war is to be managed, how an armed conflict is to be managed. And finally, at the end of it, the end state, the resolution. Because there is no war which can continue unlimited infinitely. So this is a very vast topic. I would restrict myself to the conventional war, what we normally understand as a war between the armed forces of the two countries, which is presided over by the political leadership. And that is the area that will restrict ourselves to, rather than the various other forms of armed conflict which have emerged over the last century and more so in last few decades. The presentation that I intend to touch upon will be like this. We'll just talk of concept of war as to what the war is all about. Okay, then I will give a very brief basic information which I'm sure all of you are aware of. Yet I will touch upon as to what the armed forces are all about, or what do they comprise of. Very brief introduction I will give you before we go to the subject proper. Okay, then we'll go to the causes of war, what leads to a war, okay, in terms of political considerations, economic considerations, geopolitical considerations, maybe ethnic or religious considerations, which have also led to the wars in the past. And then we come to the main topic about conflict prevention, conflict management, and conflict resolution. To begin with, a war or armed conflict is probably one of the oldest activities the humankind has ever taken place. Since the time human beings came into being, the fact that we have been more intelligent than rest of the species, okay, has made us think in various ways, has made us look into what is of our interest and what is of not our interest. And since every person, every human being thinks differently, it has invariably led to conflicts. And when the level of conflict rises, then there is a fighting which takes place between a group of people. And when those groups of people form a state or a nation state, and now when the common interest of the two nation state is in question, then is what we call a war or armed conflict takes place. So there has always been a conflict. There has always been a difference of opinion. There has always been various things at stake. There are always interests which are common to two different countries. Both of are wanting to those resources or those interests. And in order to have a right over there, in order to grab that resource or advantage or a route, the wars have been taking place. So war essentially takes place when the two nations are unable to come to any conclusion. There are conflicting interests. Okay, and none of them are wanting to let go. That is the time that a war takes place. War is the final medium of resolution, if I may say. Okay, when everything else fails, then the war takes place. And despite that, over the years, so many wars have taken place. It's a very, very complex activity. It is the highest level of belligerence that a human being can involve into. Okay, it is the highest level of aggressive activity which one can witness on the surface of the earth, and that is war. And so, when I say complex, it involves large number of people, large number of resources. The armed forces, the army, navy, and the air force which fights the wars are only the frontline workers, if I may say. They are only the face of the war. But behind that, there are large number of agencies, there are large number of people, almost the entire nation fights a war. And so the entire nation also suffers the outcome of a war. So it is such a complex and intense activity that our aim at all times should be to prevent a war. The aim has also always been to prevent a war, but it has not succeeded always, and there have been large number of wars. And so, as I show on the slide, war has been taking place since time immemorial. War is not a recent phenomenon. Okay, nature of war has changed, but the fundamental concept, as I mentioned to you, where there is a conflict of interest, and when each nation wants to have a right or a authority over that resource or over that phenomena, that is when the war takes place. And so the fundamental concept has remained there, the same. When there is a conflict of interest, when there are two nations or more than two nations wanting a particular way to themselves, then the war takes place when everything else fails. The earliest evidence of a prehistoric warfare is a cemetery in Jebel Sahaba. Jebel Sahaba is a place north of Sudan on the Egypt border in Africa. Okay, where as old as 14,000 years old, thousands of skeletons have been found with all warlike injuries. So this is the earliest evidence. That means good about 14,000 years back also, in a prehistoric era also, the wars had been taking place. Okay. Since the rise of a nation states, say 5,000 years back when the countries came into being, the military activity has covered over much of the globe. Okay, and the advent of gunpowder and other technological advances, which is happening almost every day, it is what has led to the modern warfare. Now, as they say, the wars will be lesser fought on the battlefields and more it will be fought on the IT networks, the cyberspace. So the nature of war has been changing, but the basic aim has been to harm the other nation and to have a hold over the resources which you want and you want to deny to the other nation. It is estimated that as many as some 15,000 wars, 14,500 to be precise, have taken place since 3,500 BC and has led to 3.5 billion loss of lives. If you take the number of years, only a period of about 300 years between these 5,000 years has remained peaceful. That means every year there has been some conflict, some war has been taking place in large numbers. If you go through the 100 deadliest acts of mass violence from 480 BC till now, it is nothing else but the wars. It overcomes all the pandemics which we may have faced. The kind of impact which it has got in terms of not just the lives lost, but in terms of economic slowdown, in terms of the mental makeup of the people, in terms of the psychological impact on the people who are and their families is so immense that it would always be considered as one of the deadliest acts of mass violence on the surface of the earth. Why I am saying is that most of us are far away from the battlefield. Even when such intense war is going on for last almost 2 months between Ukraine and Russia, and when the communication means are such that we are able to see the some of the live strikes, and day to day we are getting an update of the damages which are taking place. I'm sure most of us do not really appreciate what is going on over there because we are so far away from the battlefield. The kind of hardships, the kind of loss of lives, the kind of difficulties which the entire population of Ukraine and to a great extent the population of Russia is facing is something which is beyond our imagination unless and until we face it. Such is the complexity and such is the intensity of our war. And so it is so very important that we study how to prevent a war. If we can't prevent, how to manage a war, and while managing, restrict it to the areas of our interest and quickly head towards resolution. That is the gist of what I'm going to touch upon today. If we talk of concept of war or its definition, okay, then war, as I mentioned, is an intense armed conflict between states, governments, societies, or paramilitary groups such as mercenaries, insurgents, militias. All this would form part of armed conflict. That means what is happening within the country as well as between the countries will all come under the common terminology of armed conflict. It is generally characterized by extreme violence, extreme aggression, tremendous destruction, and morality using both regular armed forces or a military force as well as irregular military force. Regular military force is the one which has been formed by the government, which works under the government's authority. Irregular military force is the one which may be as competent as a military force, but which is not under the government control, which is under the control of a particular group, okay, which may not have the same ethos as the armed forces, but will have the resources and capability to fight as intensely as military forces. Those are called irregular military forces. And so a war can be defined as an armed conflict between the states or groups of states in order to fulfill predefined objectives. When you start a war, you have an objective. Like Russia has an objective that Ukraine must not join NATO. Ukraine must not change its philosophy. That is the aim of Russia. Towards that, it will do what it feels is appropriate. And having tried all the possible methods over last maybe 15 years by the present head of Russia, Mr. Putin, okay, he decided that now a stage has come where things are beyond control. Ukraine is not listening, and if it doesn't listen, then it is going to harm my own security, my own interests, and that's why, as a final step, he has gone for a war. It is not that overnight Putin decided to go for a war. It has been on for last 15 years. More so during last 8 years. Since 2015, he has been threatening that he might have to go for an armed conflict. He might have to step in with a force. Okay. Despite that, he has given so much of time. So nobody goes into a war, any sensible government, okay, unless some maverick dictatorial leaders. Other than that, nobody goes to a war without extreme reason, because it is itself, the activity is so intense and the outcome is going to be so dangerous, irrespective. Even if you win a war, there will be losses. Why did UK gave us independence in 1947? UK was on the winning side, was one of the major countries who had won the World War II. They still celebrate the V-Day, the victorious day. Okay, they were on the winning side. Then why did they give independence not to India, but most of the British colonies? Because it had been degraded to such an extent. Its resources had been degraded to such an extent after a major war like World War II that it did not have the resources, it did not have the stamina to run these colonies. So it was no great obligation that United Kingdom and England had done by giving us an independence. They had no choice but to give independence not just to us, to large number of countries over the next 15 years. So that is the kind of impact. Even if you are on a winning side, ultimately you would be a loser. Okay. Clausewitz, one of the great strategic thinkers, has defined it as an act of violence intended to compel opponents to fulfill our will. Whatever be your aim, you are now compelling the opposing nation to meet that requirement. It's all about compelling your enemy to fulfill your will, either by use of violence or threat, or use of violence, or altogether without fighting the war. In whatever way you can do. The whole aim is, and it is all part of an armed conflict, is to make other countries succumb to your requests. And so, as far as the international humanitarian law is concerned, okay, they have distinguished two types of armed conflicts. International armed conflicts, wherein there are more than two or more than two states. That means the countries, the nation states are fighting. And the non-international armed conflicts, okay, which is between government forces and non-government armed forces, what I mentioned just now, between the regular and the irregular forces, or between non-government armed groups between themselves, between the irregular forces, so which is happening within the country. Okay, so that would be called a non-international armed conflicts, but essentially all of them are armed conflicts. If we talk of levels of war, then war is fought at different levels. While the nation fights a war, it has got different levels. The highest level is a strategic level. In simple terms, it is at the governmental level, the political leadership, okay, which defines what will be the national policy, provides the resources, decides what should be the outcome of a war, up to what extent the war should continue, what should be the objectives, okay, and what would be the involvement of different stakeholders in the war. They overall lay down the aim of the war, provide the authority to go for a war, and provide the resources and monitors as to how the war is going and when it should be discontinued or when its course should be changed. So that is at the strategic level. The next one is the operational level. Operational level deals initially with the doctrines as to how to implement the doctrines which have been broadly decided, okay, and thereafter it essentially focuses on employing the military forces. This I would call at the level of the army chief, naval chief, and the service chief or the air force chief. At their level they decide together, and now we have got the chief of defense staff, okay, CDS. So at that level they decide as to what targets are to be targeted, what area needs to be subdued, what areas need to be attacked. Okay, they decide what are the targets which need to be prioritized and what kind of force should be used, whether air force should be used, navy should be used, army should be used, within that what. So that is at the operational level. They broadly decide the targets, they broadly decide the kind of operations which needs to be undertaken, Okay, and they also decide the course of war which needs to be followed, because it would largely depend on the response which you receive from the opposing country. If you think that you are prepared for a war, rest assured the opposing country is also prepared for a war, because war never starts overnight. It builds up. It builds up gradually. So while it is building up within your country, it is building up across the border also. Okay. And the last one is the tactical level. On ground. On ground, the one who actually fights the war. Okay. In the army parlance, I would call it at a divisional level or a brigade level. Okay. Who directly gives the instructions and closely monitors as to how the forces are being employed based on the directions received from the top. They work out the tactics, they work out the maneuvers to be taken, what kind of engagement to be done with the enemy forces. So these are the three different levels at which the war is fought. As I said, when a war is fought, it is not the armed forces, it's the whole nation who fights a war. The highest is the political authority. The armed forces may be fighting a war, but they do not decide when to fight or where to fight. Okay, once the war has started, then they have fair amount of freedom as to how to orchestrate a war, how to execute a war. But the decision whether to go for a war, not to go for a war, and to how much to go in for a war is taken by the political leadership. Okay. Because the whole nation is involved. So it is not something which armed forces, irrespective, even be it United States, be it UK, be it Saudi Arabia, be it Pakistan, or be it India. It is the top political leadership. Sorry, I should not include Pakistan, because Pakistan is a different country where the military probably has got more power than the elected civilian government, which we have seen time and again. Leaving that aside, okay, besides the political authority, okay, the armed forces, of course, are there. But when we say the political authority and the government, it is not just the Ministry of Defense. Ministry of External Affairs has got tremendous amount of work to do before and during the war. Diplomatically, building up the environment, explaining it to the rest of the world as to what we are doing. If you noticed, even in a small operations like the surgical strike at Uri, which army undertook, or the Balakot strikes, which Air Force undertook, where we actually went across the border and fired on their camps, there has not been any objection or any criticism from any of the country. How has that happened? It has happened because of the role of the External Affairs Ministry. They have convinced the rest of the countries and the governments as to why we undertook this operation and why we had no choice. So once they are convinced and they are explained as to why we are undertaking, so that is equally an important part. Finance, of course, tremendous amount of resources are required. Okay, all finances need to be diverted. Railways in our parlance, and roads and highways, because huge country, huge movement of forces. Not entire armies deployed on the Pakistan or China border. There are army formations which may be in Hyderabad. There are army formations which may be in Chennai. Okay, having their different responsibility. They all need to be moved. Even the immediate war fighting formations may be in the hinterland. They all need to be moved, and so tremendous amount of railways and road requirements are there, including the civil airlines, the civil aviation ministry. So this is just to give an idea as to how a war is orchestrated and what is the kind of resources which goes into it. Okay, and as a result, almost every ministry has to work in unison and support the armed forces if that war has to be orchestrated and synchronized the way we want to synchronize. I have no hesitation in stating that one of the finest examples of coherence and cooperation between the government and the armed forces and all the ministries has been a 1971 war. Although it is 50 years back, but it was an intense war and it was a very successful war. It happened not because of Field Marshal Manekshaw alone or the armed forces, but was because of the leadership provided by the then government. It was because of the support provided by all the ministries. It was also the unequivocal support provided by the opposing political parties. So when the whole nation supports, that is when the armed forces are able to execute the war they would like to and the way they have been trained about. Okay. Now, just a brief touch upon the armed forces as to what are the armed forces. When we say armed forces, it is essentially army, which fights on the ground, navy, which fights in the seas, and the air force, which flies and fights in the air. Okay, army. When we say it, army has got large number of variety of formations which has got. Okay, broadly speaking, it has got arms and supporting arms and the services about which I'll touch upon. Okay, but the army is most important part of any armed forces. Okay, because at the end of the war, it is the boots on ground, as they commonly say. Okay, ultimately you have to be on that place. You have to have your hold over that piece of land or whatever it is. Okay, and that is possible not by air force, not by navy, but by armed forces of the country which are working on ground, on land. And so the boots on ground matters, and army has a major role to play in any conflict. Ours is one of the largest standing army in the world, without any doubt. The reason being, we have a live border. If you talk of Canada and USA, they've got a huge border, but they don't deploy their armed forces because they are absolutely at peace. There is no question of any shots being fired across the border. Whereas in case of India, be it Pakistan or be it China, there is a threat 24/7, 365 days. There is a firing taking place 365 days across the border. And so there is no other choice with us but to have a standing army. Standing army in the sense an army or armed forces wherein the people are dedicatedly employed to work towards their military force all their life, almost all their life. Okay. In a country like Israel, where the population is small, but is surrounded by enemy countries. Okay, they would like to have a standing army, but the country is so small as compared to the number of opposing countries that it cannot afford to have such a large standing army. So what they have done is they have created a system which suits them best. Every person is a soldier. You are a farmer, you are a businessman, you are a banker, you are working in railways, you are a teacher, professor, student, whatever. Everybody is a soldier. Everybody is trained to be a soldier. And then they have created a system wherein at particular level of warning, or as they say alarm, those people put on the uniform and report to a predetermined place. They become soldiers overnight. So in a way, the whole nation becomes an army or air force or navy. Of course, the whole nation doesn't switch over together. They have got different levels of switching over. Maybe 1/10 will switch over first. Thereafter, another 10% will switch over, depending on the way situation is building up. So that is not a standing army, because they cannot afford to have a standing army. In our case, ours is a standing army purely because of the huge, long, belligerent border that we have. Okay. So as I was mentioning, the army consists of arms, who are the ones who directly fight a war, the support arms, who fight a war also as well as provide a support, and the services, who are working behind the curtain but are equally trained to fight a war. Okay. So when we talk of arms, there are three arms. Infantry, which is a foot soldier, what we commonly understand army is all about. Okay. Then there is armored, okay, which is tanks. As you understand, the armored tanks, which moves rapidly, which has got armored protection, so can move rapidly and fire with high caliber weapons. And then there are artillery units, which are the guns, the Bofors guns which we talk about, or the howitzer gun which we talk about. Okay, these are the artillery units which have a range of 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers. Their ammunition, once fired from these guns, can go as much as 100 kilometers and target accurately. So these are the three major arms which we have got. If we talk of support arms, then you have got engineers. Engineers, you have got combat engineers who fight also, as well as the one who leads ahead by making bridges, repairing roads, laying down mines. And wherever the minefields are there, they neutralize those minefields also. So that is the engineer's job. And the signals are the one which provides communication throughout, as well as provide surveillance, provide electronic intelligence. So these are the signals. These are the what is called as support arms. Then you've got army air defense. Okay, so there are a number of armed support units. Then there are services. Services are like the logistic supply, which is provided by Army Service Corps, Army Ordnance Corps. Okay, these are the ones which provides the support behind the scene. So this is a broad categorization as far as the army is concerned. Army is not what you normally see in photographs. Okay, it comprises of variety of jobs, and each one is clearly laid down as to who would do what. But essentially, it is the infantry, the foot soldier, it is the armored, which earlier used to be called cavalry units when they used to fight on a horse or a camel. Okay, they were the earlier versions of armored units, or they were called cavalry units, wherein an animal improved the speed of movement and could fight over there. Those horses have been replaced by tanks now, where tanks move in any kind of terrain, okay, and are heavily guarded, as a result of which the fighting force could move well ahead. Okay, this is some of the photographs to show the insignia of Indian Army on the top left. You can see the infantry unit, the foot soldier. You can see artillery gun, which is firing. Down below, you have got a tank on the Rajpath Republic Day parade. Then you got mechanized vehicles. You got mechanized infantry also. Mechanized infantry is between infantry and armored. Okay, and of course there are signal units carrying radars and communication setups. If we come to Navy, then Navy is the one which guards the maritime boundaries and maritime assets. They have got aircraft carriers, that means huge warships on which aeroplanes can land and take off. Okay, if you have to launch aeroplane 1,000 kilometers away, then your aeroplane from your airports cannot go and attack 1,000 kilometers away or 5,000 kilometers away. But ships can go, and from ships those aeroplanes can take off and land back on the ship. Those are called aircraft carriers. You go submarines, you are well aware of it. Destroyers, anti-submarine warfare ships. There are anti-submarine warfare helicopters also. Okay, then there are surveillance patrolling aeroplanes, which does the patrolling of the seas and captures the images and signals. Frigates, corvettes, these are different types of warships, and of course the fuel tankers. Some photographs of what the Indian Navy is all about. Besides the insignia, you can see an aircraft carrier, aeroplanes flying over the ship, and the small runway you can see on the ship itself, on which it lands and takes off. Okay, then you got submarine, you got a destroyer ship, warfare ship, and oil tanker. Because when your ships are operating so far away, you have to have a tanker to refurbish the oil. Coming to Air Force, okay, it deals with aerial threats and aerial warfare. Any modern war begins with an air campaign, because unless and until you neutralize the air assets of the enemy country, your army or navy will not be able to successful. You may have a powerful army to go across border, but the enemy air force can come and attack from the top. Navy may not be around if the seas are not around, but air force can always come and neutralize your army from top. So the first mission of any war in these days is to neutralize the enemy air force. If not neutralize, at least subdue the enemy air force, so that our rest of the forces can go ahead. Okay, so it is responsible for gaining the control of the air. It provides the air defense of the nation 24/7. It carries out the bombing mission, strategic and tactical, and it also supports army, as I just now mentioned, as well as navy. If the naval ships are going, then Indian Air Force or Air Force aeroplanes could also provide support besides their integral air force. Okay, and they also carry out the reconnaissance and provide a close air support. So the Air Force consists of fighter airplanes. We are well aware of the bombers. Bombers are no more in existence now, because we have come to a stage where multi-role aeroplanes are there. The same platform can do bombing, same platform can do combat in the air, same platform can provide air defense to the nation. Helicopters, besides the normal helicopters which carries passengers, soldiers and load, there are attack helicopters, and then there are transport aircrafts. The huge airliner kind of wide-bodied aeroplanes, which are of course used for carrying the army formations, the soldiers, as well as cargo. It also serves as a tanker to refuel the fighter aeroplanes. And the AWACS. AWACS are eyes in the sky. There are radars in the sky. So these are different uses of a transport aircraft. And then you've got air defense assets like air defense radars and anti-aircraft missiles. Some view about the Indian Air Force insignia. Then a fighter aircraft, just for example, a MiG-27 has been shown firing a missile rocket. Su-30 is a multi-role aircraft, is an example of a multi-role aircraft, okay, which can do air defense also, which can do a defensive role also, offensive role also. Apache helicopter, the latest combat helicopter, latest attack helicopter that we have got, okay, a frontline attack helicopter, okay, which can go at a treetop level and can fire wherever required, be it rockets, be it missiles, be it guns. On the wings of the Apache helicopter, you can see the barrels which will have the rockets placed in that and a space for putting a missile. Tanker, I just now mentioned to you, where the fighter aeroplanes have to go a long distance, the tankers would be there, and the way these probes are attached to those Mirage 2000 aeroplanes, the fuel is transferred from this wide-bodied transport aeroplane. This is IL-76. The fuel is transferred from there to these aeroplanes. So the fuel tanker is another innovation which has happened in last few decades. Rafale, of course, you all are aware of multi-role latest aeroplane. What are the causes of armed conflict before we proceed further? The causes of armed conflicts could be very many. The most common would be a political cause. Power and politics is a major cause of a war. Okay. Somebody needs territorial expansion. The Kuwait War. The Kuwait War happened because Iraq decided to encroach upon the country of Kuwait and make it part of its country. Okay. 1948, Pakistan forces entered Kashmir. The problem is still alive. Okay. What was it? To expand their territory. Okay. So besides that, there could be a question of survival of a state or a security. Okay. So these are political reasons could be there. Indochina 62 war. China wanted to extend its territory. Indo-Pakistan war of 65 war. In 65, Pakistan got emboldened, thinking that they can cut the Kashmir from rest of the India and can take charge of it. Or the Kargil conflict. Pakistan thought that they can cut down on the Leh-Srinagar highway and can dismember that part of the country. So these are all political causes which leads to a war. Then there could be ethnic or religious causes also, as we have seen in Bosnia, the ethnic conflict of 92-95, or even in Sri Lanka, the ethnic conflict which happened with LTT and continued for long years, causing wide-ranging destruction and loss of lives. Okay. There could be geopolitical. Okay, use of geography to pursue political interest of the nation is called geopolitics. Okay, I give you an example of 47-48 war on Kashmir. The recent Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which of course did not bear the fruits it was aimed at. And of course, the Ukraine-Russia conflict which is happening. These are all because of the geopolitical consideration. So there could be any consideration. There could be any point of conflict which cannot be resolved between the two countries, okay, where nobody is wanting to go let go the stakes, would invariably lead to a war. There could be very many reasons leading to a war. In the in the earlier times, if you go through the stories and all that, then war was the main purpose of a king or an emperor or a nation. So on the flimsiest of the grounds, a war used to take place. We have come a long way. We have taken considerations of losses which happens, and now it is a very considerate decision in most cases. Okay, in most cases, a very, very considerate decision whether to go for a war or not to go for a war. And so let's come to the, having given this little background, let's come to the main issue that we want to touch upon. That is conflict prevention. Okay, the best solution in case of a conflict of interest is conflict prevention. At any stage, we should aim that war does not take place. Because as I said, people associated with the war and people not associated with the war, everybody will get affected because of that. And the impact is, I keep repeating it, impact is going to be so huge, okay, that at times it takes generations to come out of it. It is said that after the Second World War, okay, where America was on the winning side. In fact, where America was one of the not one of the biggest country to benefit out of Second World War, and the one which was in the forefront of the Allied forces in the Second World War. As many as 90 to 95% of the soldiers, be it Air Force, Army, or Navy, had psychological problems, because you are witnessing a kind of violence which you have not even thought of. You are experiencing the kind of stress that you are not prepared for, however good training you may have gone through. That is the kind of stress, that is the kind of things you are seeing, the kind of hardships that you are facing. You could be a POW and could be subjected to any kind of thing, leave aside Geneva Convention. So the impact is so huge on the bodily and mentally, okay, that it leaves a person shattered at the end of a war. And when you have a sustained war like Second World War, okay, which carried on for good about 6 years, okay, then you can well imagine what must be the impact on those soldiers. Okay, so at any cost, conflict prevention is the best option. If not, then next is management. You must manage that war, that it remains restricted to your aims and your resources. It doesn't get out of control. Okay, you have failed, you have not been able to succeed in pacifying or in explaining or convincing the other nation. You necessarily have to go for a war. Then do ensure that it is managed well. Okay, wherein the minimal loss of life, minimal loss of resources takes place. And at the end of it, irrespective whether managed or unmanaged, you have to look for a resolution. No war can go on indefinitely. And so you have to have a resolution which is respected and which is acceptable to all the warring stakeholders. So that is the final state. Okay, coming to conflict prevention. Okay, there are various ways in which a war can be prevented. Okay, and as I mentioned, prevention is always better than management. Most countries and international institutions like United Nations, they stress on conflict prevention. But it is easier said than done. Because countries, as I said, when they decide to go for a war, it is a very, very considerate decision. They take everything into consideration. They take whole nation into confidence. They take their armed forces into confidence. They prepare them well, and then only they go for a war. Okay. Yet, the effort to prevent a war should never discontinue. Even when a country is all set to go for a war, the effort to stop that country from going to a war must continue, because war causes enormous amount of hardship, losses, and damages, bodily as well as otherwise. Okay. So towards that, whereas tools are available, which we have been witnessing, diplomacy, of course, at the level of governments, at the level of foreign ministries, which are the face of the government outside. Okay, we must have a dialogue. We must try and resolve the issue. Little give and take should be the aim. Okay, so that a war is avoided. So diplomacy has a major role to play, and it can succeed, and it has succeeded in the past in number of cases. Where a diplomacy doesn't work, that means a direct dialogue between the two countries, there could be mediation. A third country or a group of countries could mediate, in which both the nations, both the belligerent nations have a confidence. Okay, he could be a third party. He could mediate, he could explain, he could bring them on the discussion tables and see to it that war is prevented. There could be peace agreements between the states. Okay, if there are frequent wars taking place, you could have peace agreements that come what may, we will not fire, we will not fight. Like we often hear about ceasefire agreement between India and Pakistan. Okay, it is a different matter that Pakistan violates them quite often, but still, to a great extent, those ceasefire agreements have worked. Okay, so if an agreement is signed when both the parties decide to not to launch a war, come what may. So the peace agreements could be one such means, and multilateralism. Okay, wherein more than one parties come into play and ensure that war doesn't take place. More and more countries join in, wherein it becomes difficult to launch a war. Okay. And as I said, it is easier said than done. Conflict prevention is not a science, it's an art. Which tool will work, you do not know. Okay, because it is a game which is played at the mental level. Okay, you need to convince, you need to speak in a language which other country understands well. When I say language, in the sense a logic which is understood well. Okay, and so it's an art. State must use proper conflict prevention tool in time bound manner so that the actual conflict doesn't take place. In that, United Nations is mandated to prevent a war. In fact, after the First World War was over, a League of Nations was established with an aim that Second World War doesn't take place at all. So much of hardship and damages had taken place in the First World War that all countries decided that come what way, we should never experience this kind of war again. And so a League of Nations was established. But it failed. It failed, and a Second World War took place in no less than 20 years. 1919, the First World War ended. 1939, the Second World War had started. Okay. So at the end of Second World War, once again, all the countries, the ones who won and the ones who lost, they all said that this is a intense, unacceptable activity. We should not have, and so the United Nations organization was formed. There are different views on United Nations organizations. In certain areas, they have succeeded. In certain areas, they have not succeeded so much. Okay, because there are a number of power centers which play their part in a multilateral organization with nearly 200 members. Out of 200, at least there are 30-40 countries which are highly influential, who can dictate the course of action. And so it is difficult to have efficiency which is expected out of United Nations. I have worked closely with United Nations, and so I can say very clearly that it is very, very difficult to bring everybody on the same table and come out with a conclusion. Okay. Notwithstanding, it is a platform. It is a platform which is available where it can work. As far as the war prevention is concerned, it has not succeeded to a great extent because there are different interest groups within the United Nations. It doesn't have the kind of mandate or the kind of authority. After all, it's a voluntary organization. Okay, so it doesn't have the authority to prevail upon any country. That kind of teeth it doesn't have. And so it has done its best, but it has not succeeded so far to a great extent in preventing a war. Otherwise, the war that we are witnessing would not have been taking place had the United Nations been successful. They have been having various tools to their in their kitty, like sanctions or passing resolutions against a particular state, okay, or a mediation, arranging a mediation between the states and all that. Okay. Where it has succeeded to a great extent is a UN peacekeeping forces, which is largely an armed conflict within the nation. Okay, over there, where there is nobody to take charge, nobody to stop the irregular military forces or the terror groups which are operating over there. Okay, over there the UN peacekeeping force has succeeded to a great extent. I won't say it has always succeeded, otherwise the Rwanda genocide would not have taken place. Rwanda genocide is a black mark on a collective performance of the entire world. I've been to Rwanda. I've been to their genocide literature and museum, and so I know. For 100 days, mark my words, for 100 days, every day, 10,000 people were killed on an average. For 100 days, more than 3 months, every day on an average, 10,000 people were killed and nobody could stop it. Leave aside United Nations. There was a small United Nations force in Rwanda. The whole world was watching. The so-called superpowers were aware and were watching, and yet nobody could stop it. Okay, so UN peacekeeping force has not succeeded always, but in large number of cases it has succeeded in preventing an armed conflict or at least restricting the armed conflict. Okay, so United Nations may use either one or combination of these measures towards that. The United Nations headquarters is in New York, and a UN peacekeeping force, you can see it, okay, under a same blue flag and wearing the same blue helmet or a blue beret, which is the signature mark of a peacekeeping force. The force is deployed. Okay, everybody puts on a similar uniform. Everybody has got similar vehicles. They are not camouflaged vehicles like you see the military tanks. They are all white in color because they are here for a peace. The helicopters also are also painted in white color. So from a distance, they belong to the United Nations peacekeeping force. Okay, they are commonly called blue berets because they all wear the caps which are sky blue in color, or a helmet which is sky blue in color, and their vehicles are all painted white. United Nations peacekeeping force. Number of countries again voluntarily join to contribute the forces and fight for a common cause. I've been part of a UN peacekeeping force in Congo for more than a year. I thought I would share some of the photographs here. You can see the flag of United Nations, India and Congo flying together. Our Indian Air Force helicopters, no more Indian Air Force, but now United Nations colors they are wearing, white in color. What you see in the background is one of the most active volcanoes in the world, Nyaragongo. That is the one which is emitting the clouds from its top. This is the place where I was deployed, a place called Goma. On the left, what you can see is a multilateral force, people from different countries. There are Pakistanis here, there are Chinese here, there are Bangladeshis here, there are Jordanian here, and of course the Indians are there. To the right, you see the plight of the locals in their camps. This is the kind of people which had suffered and were kept in a camp, and there were hundreds of such camps. And further down, what you see is the people who have been dropped from a helicopter the soldiers who have been deployed where a problem is coming up or their logistics load has been dropped. So some glimpses of my experiences of a UN peacekeeping force in Congo in 2007-2008. Role of domestic politics is also important because, as I say, the whole nation fights a war. The opposing parties, they may be against the government, they may be anti-government, but they also need to consider that now it is not a party in power which is fighting a war, but a nation is fighting a war. We have been fortunate that in all the wars that we have seen, our opposition has been unitedly be with the government, providing extensive support to the government. That goes to the credit of our polity and our democracy, that in India, the opposition parties, irrespective of the cause of the war or irrespective of the trigger of the war, they have always stood by the government and the armed forces in providing support. Okay. They may criticize subsequent to the war, but at the time of the war, they have stood unitedly with the government, with the armed forces in each of the conflicts that we have witnessed so far. Okay. Role of a superpower. The fact that somebody is a superpower, that means he has got that kind of clout, that kind of dependence. It can wield that authority, it can wield that influence, okay, to resolve and to prevent a war. There's no doubt about it. A superpower or a country on which the belligerent nations are dependent upon, if he says something, then for sure he would be listened and a war can be prevented. But as it often happens in international relations, as they say, there are no permanent friends, there are only permanent interests. In international arena, nobody is, you can't say that France is our friend or America is our friend or Russia is our friend. Nobody is a friend forever. Your friend as long as there are common interests. It is the interests which dictates the friendship. And so in case of a superpower also, he would like to step in only if he finds the interest to itself, which we have seen quite often. Otherwise, it has the authority, it has the influence to prevent a war, but in most cases, it would step in only when it finds that by preventing a war, it is going to be of his interest. Okay. So what? So
टाटा
now
से
what?
वही चलते इल्ला
Dhiranjan, please mute your mic. Dhiranjan,
हेलो
Dhiranjan, please mute your mic. Dhiranjan, can you mute your mic? Okay, sorry
Okay.
for distraction.
Yeah, no problems. Okay. So the next step is conflict management. If you can't prevent a war, then at least manage it well. What do you mean by managing it? Okay, that means restricting its scope as well as severity to the extent required, to what you have decided. Okay. Conflict management is achieving your objectives without much loss of human life or resources. When I say much, means not more than what is required. Okay. And so conflict management is dependent upon what are the objectives of the conflict. What have you decided? What is your capability? And what is the international political situation? If you don't pay attention to these things and be alive to these three things, okay, then conflict management will go out of your control, and then irreparable losses would happen. Conflict management is important because if you are not able to manage it and restrict it within the scope and severity that you have decided, it can spread across the region. From becoming a war between the two nations, other nations can get affected and it can spread, ultimately leading to even world war. Okay. Proper conflict management can be done if there is well-defined objective. You have to have, before the war, before you have decided to go for a war, you have to decide what is your objective and thereafter stick to it. Just because an opportunity is available, you should not change your objective. So a nation must stick to the objectives, do proper planning so that unnecessary resources are not wasted. Okay, there should be a clear political will. It can't be that you decide to go for a war and after 3 years you say no, let's scale it down. Okay, after another 3 years, okay, let us increase the intensity of the war. It can't be like this. There should be a clear political war, whether go or no go. Okay, and a coherent strategy as to how you would go about it. Rest you leave to the armed forces to orchestrate it. But there has to be a clear directions and a clear political will. Okay, and thereafter, as far as the armed forces are concerned, appropriate and accurate use of hard and soft power. Only use that much force what is required. Okay, then only you can manage the conflict. I have no hesitation in stating that the best examples of conflict management is 1971 war. What was our aim? Our aim was that Bangladesh must come into being, because despite our best efforts, despite our repeated requests and threats to Pakistan not to let the Bangladeshis or the East Pakistanis come into India thereafter, and thereby creating a problem for ourselves, they were not paying heed to it. So we had no choice but to go in for a war. But what was our aim? Our aim was to make it as an independent country and let them fulfill their aspirations. The leader of the East Pakistan must become the leader of that country. That was the aim. And so the moment the Pakistani forces surrendered, we were the first ones to declare it as a country. We did not keep it even for a day. Otherwise, we were told the entire East Pakistan was under our control. We could have merged it with India to widen our country, to make it, to enlarge our country. No, that was never the thing. Within no time, we were the first country to declare Bangladesh as an independent country, to grant sovereignty to and our support to that country. We did not hold ourselves into that country even for a moment. So that is what it is. Similarly, the West Pakistan at that point of time was in poor state. We could have launched a full-fledged war on West Pakistan, taking advantage of the situation. We did not do that. And that is what is the example of a conflict management. Kargil war. We had decided that intrusions have taken place, but we will not go beyond the LOC. Our Air Force would not fly beyond the LOC. It was decided and it was stuck. Otherwise, we could have very well gone across the LOC and targeted their logistical lines and their formations which were behind. But we had decided that this is the scope of our war and we'll fight within this. So these are the examples of conflict management. Okay. If not, if at the end of it, you have to go for a conflict resolution. As I had mentioned earlier, whatever be the cause of war, whatever be the scope of war, okay, whatever be the stakeholders, at the end of it, there will have to be a resolution. Okay. And so conflict resolution is the last phase in conflict handling cycle. It ensures that all stakeholders agree to end conflict with a mutually acceptable conditions. It is question of give and take. Not everybody can be happy at the end with the end state. But the choice is very clear. You want to continue with the war, or you want to bring an end to it with limited gains and limited losses. This is a important, or this is a gist of the whole thing. Okay. If handled properly, conflict resolution itself helps in conflict prevention. Okay. So what are the measures or tools available for conflict resolution? Ceasefire agreements. Okay. It is decided that, okay, we remain where we are. Let us stop the war. Thereafter, we'll discuss and decide who gains what or who loses what. Ceasefire. That means from this moment onwards, or from this day onwards, we stop fighting and remain wherever we are. Bilateral or multilateral talks between the stakeholders. Okay. Countries may decide that, okay, now we bring an end to the war and begin discussion and decide what should be done, what should not be done. The peace agreements could be signed that in future we'll not have a war. Okay. Confidence building measures could be initiated so as to bring in confidence that yes, we are genuinely interested in not fighting again or not having a war again. So these are the various tools. Depending on the situation, depending on the acceptability of the countries, we can have it. Negotiations, discussions are important part of conflict resolution. At times it backfires also. Okay, in 1948, when Pakistan sent their irregular forces or regular forces in irregular uniforms into Kashmir to grab the state of Jammu and Kashmir, we fought back. After the accession was officially done, we fought back and started pushing back. But at that time, the leadership had tremendous faith in the United Nations. United Nations, which had come up just 3 years back. Okay, our country, which was proposing ourselves to be a peace-loving country and a neutral country, had a lot of faith in United Nations, and so asked United Nations to preside over a ceasefire. So United Nations supported ceasefire came into being. Unfortunately, the United Nations could not force the conditions for resolution of that conflict. And that's why the problem continues. So at times it can backfire also. There are a lot of opinions that we should have continued the pushback and thrown back the Pakistanis out of the full state of Jammu and Kashmir. But these are the decisions which are taken at that point of time. And decisions are not taken by one person. It is a collective decision which is taken by the government, by the cabinet, taking opposition into confidence as to what should we do. So it is one such decision where for conflict resolution, we had our faith in United Nations, but it did not work out. And so the problem is alive and continues to be a major problem till now. Okay. As I mentioned, if not handled properly, can result into crisis or deadlock situation. We are in a deadlock situation. The first condition when United Nations ordered ceasefire between India and Pakistan in 1948 over Kashmir, the first condition was that Pakistan forces must withdraw first. That was the first condition from the entire state of Kashmir. And thereafter the plebiscite would take place. That means some kind of voting would take place whether the people want to be part of India or want to be Pakistan. Often it is brought out that India has not allowed plebiscite to take place. It cannot, because the first condition was the armed forces, the whole nation was to be vacated. The whole state was to be vacated by Pakistan, which it has not done, even by an inch. Okay, so this is where the role of United Nations and the decision to go to United Nations for a ceasefire is in question. Okay, as I already mentioned, the last bullet, 48 Kashmir resolution. Okay, raising of Kashmir issue has not resolved the matter. One more opportunity came up in 1971 war. When we were on the victorious side, we were literally dictating the terms. The Shimla Agreement took place in 1972, okay, where we had the influence. That was another opportunity where we could have dictated upon Pakistan to withdraw from the state of Kashmir. Unless and until you withdraw, we will not let your 93,000 POWs, prisoners of war, let go to Pakistan. We had 93,000 prisoners of war of Pakistan, and that means 93,000 families were up in arms in Pakistan. Each one of them were demanding that our soldier, our father, our son must come back. That was a great influence which we had, but we failed that time. We allowed them to go without getting anything substantial in return. Otherwise, even the second opportunity which came up, we could have resolved the Kashmir issue. That is my opinion. So having talked about conflict resolution, conflict management, and to start it with conflict prevention, the last thing what I want to touch upon is that all this what we have talked about is about the conventional war. Okay, conventional wars are here to stay. They are never going to go away, because boots on ground matters. At the end of it, you may win a cyber war, but at the end of it, to hold over the another country, you will have to have boots on ground. The army will have to be there, the air force will have to be there, and the navy will have to be there to support. Okay, yet there are, if we take the wider perspective of the armed conflict, then the 21st century has witnessed more complex issues coming up and more complex armed conflicts coming up because of emergence of asymmetric warfare. What is terrorism? Terrorism is an asymmetric warfare. You're not wanting to fight face to face. Okay, but like Pakistan mentioned, 1,000 cuts. They are giving 1,000 cuts to our body by putting a blade here, putting a blade there, and giving cuts here and there. Making a terror attack here, making a terror attack there, trying to destabilize the country. Asymmetric warfare. Development of weapons of mass destruction. From the end of Second World War, when the atom bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, weapons of mass destruction in form of not just the nuclear weapons, but biological weapons, chemical weapons have flourished all over. Not only that, now a technology has gone into the hands of terrorist groups also, which is more dangerous. At least nations would think 10 times before using weapons of mass destruction. Okay, but same could not be said about a terror group which doesn't have a well laid down hierarchy and a considerate decision-making body. Okay, so weapons of mass destruction could change the complete complexion of the armed conflict. A smallest of the nation could change the complexion of war by using chemical weapons or biological weapons. Emergence of increasing prominence of non-state actors. Countries do not take liability of those actors, but they are harming the other nation. And that is what Pakistan is doing. Each of the terror groups are on the soil of Pakistan, being funded indirectly, being supported indirectly, but they do not officially support them. Yet those groups are working in the interest of Pakistan and in the interest against India. Rapidly changing technology and proliferation of technology across the spectrum. What I mentioned just now. Crypto and quantum computing is just the latest, but the technology is going to change every day. And with the change of technology, every technology will find its way in the use of aggressors, in the use of weapons. And when I say weapons, weapons are not restricted to the countries, they are also with the terror groups. So each of the modern technologies which we try and use for weapons of war, the same would be utilized by non-state actors and terrorists, which will change the complete complexion. That means a small terror group can hold a country to ransom, because now it has got a tremendous value addition in form of these high technology weapons into their hand. So these aspects are becoming defining factors in the evolution of conflict resolution and management mechanism. But suffice to say that to begin with, conventional wars are here to stay. The Army, Air Force, and Navy will have to remain to protect the nation and will have to remain on their toes. Yet, while they remain on toes, while they train themselves and while they upgrade themselves to the latest technology and weapons for an eventuality, the effort towards your combat prevention, armed conflict prevention, will have to continue at all times, because there is no other activity on the surface of the earth which causes as much destruction, as much loss of life, and as much devastation as a war. So war at all times must be prevented. If not prevented, must be restricted and managed, and at the end of it, quickly the issues should be resolved. That should be the aim at all times. With this, I have finished. If there are any questions, I'll take it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir, for your insightful the session on the armed conflict. You started from the basics and then how it can be managed and the latest trends. So we have some of the questions from the students. And Hardik, you can unmute and ask also. Hardik, Shreyans, and other students they can ask. Hardik, over to you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Sir, my question is that United Nations main objective is to keeping peace all over the world. But in current situation, we have seen that in some countries like have veto power, have invade in other sovereign territory without means. So we can say that the objective of United Nations is fail here, and in near future, if anything certain this thing like happen again, so we have to think a new intergovernmental organization as an alternative of United Nations. Your views?
I,
I want.
I agree with you. United Nations as a platform is the right platform. We need not discard the platform because besides peacekeeping, okay, it is doing large number of other activities. UNICEF, you are well aware of. Okay, so similarly, large number of activities it is coordinating. You have to have a nodal agency which will get the resources and provide those resources at the most appropriate place on the earth. So towards that, the platform is perfect. Platform is good. So many, almost every country has become member of it and is contributing to that. As far as the prevention of war is concerned, as I mentioned, it has not succeeded. Okay, and that is essentially because the powerful body is the Security Council, and the Security Council was formed soon after World War II. So the ones who were victors, the ones who were on the winning side, okay, became a member and has got tremendous authority in form of a veto power. If you ask me, in today's times, England, France has got no business to be on the Security Council. That is my view. America understood Russia is a different philosophy and a huge nation. By all means, it should be there. China also, whatever it be its philosophy, it's a huge nation with huge resources and huge population. So it should also be there. But England and France have lost their relevance and they have no business to take decision and issue veto power on the affairs of the entire world. The things have changed. So there is a need to have a reconstitution of a Security Council, especially the United Nations, especially the Security Council, where instead of 5 members, you could have 10 members or 15 members, so that more inclusiveness is there. And the veto power also need to be altered. It need not be with one country. There should be some system that at least 1/3 country should be in agreement with the veto power, something like that. And in that also, the affected country, like Russia is using veto power, the affected country should not be having a veto power when it is when its own actions are being discussed. So these are some of my views, but I agree there's a immediate requirement to reconstitute the Security Council to start with in the United Nations.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is Shreyans. You can unmute and ask. Shreyans, over to you.
Yes, yes. So good afternoon, sir. And first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pretty nice session. Thank you so much.
Welcome,
Yeah.
Shreyans.
Uh, sir. So my question to you is that we are going through a rough phase after the pandemic, and there are a lot of nations who believe that this is the kind of right opportunity for them to show how much they are strong. And recently, we have seen Palestine issue being raised again, and then Afghanistan and Taliban, and currently we are witnessing a massive war between Ukraine and Russia. So my question to you is that after this pandemic, don't you think that we need a kind of disarmament movement that we have seen before, like NPT and like Treaty of Versailles and all these things, which had a great impact on other countries who are aggressive. So if we get into any disarmament movement, it might prevent another war globally.
Yours is a very noble idea. Okay, yours is a very noble idea, but disarmament doesn't work. Okay, as I mentioned at the very beginning, so many wars have taken place since last 14,000 years. Okay, the wars cannot be stopped. Wars are going to take place. In fact, the wars, as I just now mentioned, are becoming more and more complex, more and more technology savvy. Okay, So where 200 nations are on this earth, how do you expect each one to agree to a disarmament? It is not going to happen. Okay, what we can do is we can work towards prevention of a conflict. Okay, that okay, you keep your arms and ammunition for your own security, for that moment when somebody may attack you or may come against you. So you have to have that kind of force to yourself. But just because you have got a force doesn't mean you necessarily have to use, and we have to work on the conflict resolution, that wherever a problem comes up, see, problem will always come up. In families also problem comes up because of conflict of opinion. So in the world, conflict of opinion will always be there. The moment such a hotspot comes up, everybody else should join hands to resolve it so that conflict doesn't take place. That should be the aim. That's my opinion.
Sir, the other part of my question is that when the primary job of United Nations is to maintain peace globally and to maintain friendly relations, don't you think that they must include this or do certain kind of amendments that must include disarmament? Because I have never seen UN getting into all these things.
No. There is a department of disarmament within the United Nations. They are working in their own way towards disarmament. I'm not saying it is not so. Okay, even for the nuclear weapons, they are working. But at the end of the day, okay, it is the nations are all sovereign countries. Okay, they decide what is good for them. Okay, if Pakistan feels that it has a threat of a nuclear weapons from India, which is not there. Okay, despite our such huge standing and our declared aim of no first use, if Pakistan still feels, okay, then they will develop nuclear weapons. They have developed nuclear weapons by stealing technology from here and there. We have not done that. Okay, so countries would always guard themselves as the way they think is fit. Okay, so despite United Nations having this noble aim and having departments working towards it, at the end of the day, it is the interest of the country which dictates what it should do, what it should not do. And of course, then there are some maverick leaders of certain countries who will not listen to United Nations openly. North Korea will just not listen whatever kind of United Nations you may form. Even if you give the powerful authority to a United Nations, the China may not listen, North Korea may not listen, to some extent Iran may not listen. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you very much. This will be the last question because we have another session lined up for the live streaming. So, Santosh Chakma, you can
Yes.
unmute and ask.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. It has been a very insightful and informative presentation from your side. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Santosh.
My question is, in the past fortnight or 10 days, we have been actually seeing lots of information, including visuals of civilians being killed after torture, raped, mass graves, etc., and allegedly by the Russian forces. And there have been news of involvement of the ICC under the Rome Statute. So, if in fact those kinds of happenings have taken place, atrocities, torture, of killings, rapes, then obviously the ICC has to involve into inquiry and go for trial for the perpetrators. Do you think, sir, that is possible if that has happened?
It is possible. It is possible. The reasons of various devastations would be inquired upon at the end of the war. There's no doubt about it. And the perpetrators who have used force more than required or carried out some heinous acts would certainly be subjected to the International Criminal Court or International Court of Law. Okay, but what I want to highlight is, don't get carried away by what you are seeing on media. Okay, media is 90% Western media, which is pumping in all the stories. Okay, please do not form an opinion. I am not saying that what Russia is doing is correct, but do not form an opinion that it is only Russia which is causing rapes and murders and genocide in Ukraine. Ukraine is not a divine nation. Okay,
Yes, yes,
Ukraine is
yes,
no less.
yes.
Okay, so both are from the same pedigree, both are equally powerful, both are equally resourceful. Okay, but what we are seeing is the Western version of what is happening in Russia. All these news about 300 killings and 300 graves coming out, there is equal kind of story from the Russian side which says that it is Ukrainians who killed them. Okay, because it is a neo-Nazi kind of government, and when they found that these were the people who were indirectly helping the Russian forces, they have killed them. So that is also a story which is coming up. So let's not form an opinion, but be sure that each of them are equally culpable of what is happening. Neither Russia is more violent, nor is Ukraine more violent. That is what I would say.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, sir. We'll be closing the session because we are running short of time. You have given your valuable time, sir, like spending almost 1.5 an hour. And I also got a lot of insight, and this is my first session on the armed conflict in this detail, from the basic till emerging trend. And you also rightly stated your experience in being a part of UN peacekeeping force. So that's again, I know the couple of person that I'm in touch. They've been part of this peacekeeping mission. This is very exclusive and very special when you are in the associated with the armed forces. So thank you very much, sir, for your insight, and look forward to see you in the future sessions also.
Most welcome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. And
Thank you
thanks
very much,
to each,
sir.
all the students. Thank you very much. So
Yeah,
kind of
thank
you.
you very much. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.